for the session Organizational and Social Applications for Artificial Intelligence, session 930. Today we have 4 interesting talks on the application of artificial intelligence in different environments, which we go through. During the presentation, I would ask everyone to mute themselves so we don't have any interruption. We would go for 10 minutes presentation and a 10 minutes question session. For the question session, I would ask you to either write a question in the chat, then I will read it aloud, or to raise your hand with the reaction button on the right side, and then I would call you to ask the question. Perfect. So the first presentation is actually from me and our author team. So I would just share my screen and then start. One second. So I will just keep the time for myself. So perfect. Hello, I'm Thiemo. I'm a PhD student at the University of St.Gallen and currently a research collaborator at the Human Computer Interaction Institute at Carnegie Mellon University. Today, I will present you our research about AI-based argumentation tutoring systems together with my co-authors. This research has been conducted with my co-authors Andreas, Janson, Matthias, Soellner, and Jan-Marco Leimeister. If you're interested in any of the artifacts in our paper, for example, the corpus, please scan the barcode or visit our website here below. Before I start the paper in a nutshell, in our research, we conducted a design science research approach to answer the question on how to design AI-based argumentation tutoring systems to help learners to train their argumentation skills. In doing so, we evaluated several design principles and design features for the effective design of self-regulated argumentation tutoring systems based on recent advantages of artificial intelligence and machine learning. At the end, we derive a nascent design theories for the design of such systems, and we hope to contribute to the OECD Learning Framework 2030 towards a more metacognition scale-based education. What we see in discussions with students or with individuals in general is that not only facts is the key ingredients to pursue the opponent, but rather the way how you organize your knowledge in the lines of argumentation. This comes by the fact that knowledge is not anymore stored in large books like this ones, but can be constantly accessed via smart devices. Therefore, the current requirements for skill sets of the future employee or the future individuals is shifting towards a more metacognition skill-based education, which is also depicted in the OECD Learning Framework 2030. However, in order to train skills such as argumentation or other metacognition skills, usually individual tutoring and feedback is necessary in the individual learning process of a student. This means if a student conducts a certain writing exercise, he or she should receive individual feedback during that exercise. This is and always was hardly possible since this one-to-one relationship between lecturer and student is usually not given in large-scale university lectures or in the rising field of massive open online courses. In fact, the relationship between student lecturers is often disangled in time and location. Therefore, several scholars since several years try to enrich these scenarios by using technology-mediated learning tools in order to help students to learn independent of an educator, time, and location, and for lecturers to focus on more important tasks or weaker students. Also for argumentation skill learning, there has been a lot of research since about 35 years, and especially intelligent tutoring systems and computer-supported collaborative learning tools have been of special interest. According to Chewei 2015, 3 different approaches can be compared in current literature. First of all, representation guided approaches, which help students to display the lines of argumentation with, for example, note and links. Second, we have discussion scripting approaches, which help individuals to pre-structure their arguments in pre-structured forms, and third, adaptive writing support systems, which aim to provide students feedback with syntactical rules. In our research, we aim to derive insights for a new novel class of augmentation tutoring systems, which we call self-regulated AI-based augmentation tutoring systems. Hereby, we build on self-learning algorithms from the field of natural language processing and machine learning in order to build a socio-technical systems perspective with a learner-centered view, where we combine different proven learning theories to build a self-regulated learning tool. Overall, our aim is to answer the research question on how to design these AI-based augmentation tutoring systems to help learners to train their augmentation skills. In order to do so, we follow a design science research approach following PEFAS 2007, where we first identify the problem, derive requirements from user interviews and a structured literature review in order to formulate design principles for the efficient design of these systems. We also did that in our research, and we derived 7 design principles and demonstrated them with 4 technical artifacts in 2 evaluations. We evaluated an instantiation of our system in 2 studies, namely a laboratory experiment and a field study. The architecture of the system, which we instantiated, looks like this. A student conducts a certain writing exercise and writes a text, and our system provides argumentation feedback based on his or her argumentation skill level. In the backend of our system, we annotated a novel corpora of student-generated text, where we annotated the argumentation level based on claims and premises and their relations. We use this novel corpora to train a machine learning model to identify then the argumentation level of students and provide them adaptive feedback based on student and theory requirements. We instantiated our design principles with design features. For example, design feature 4, where we have in-text highlighting of the argumentation structures of the students. Design feature 5, where we have like a note and graph structure to display the argumentation discourse. And for example, design feature 6, where we try to help students based on their argumentation or errors. The interaction of the system looked like this. A student was writing a certain text and then could click the analyze button. Here he would receive instant argumentation feedback and also explanations on how to use the system. For example, if he clicks on explanation, he could see that claims are highlighted in green and premises are highlighted in yellow. Next, the overall argumentation system also displays the different claims and premises. And if a student clicks on a certain claim, he can see how a claim is supported by premises. For example, this claim here is supported by 4 different premises. Also, we displayed the argumentation discourse for the student to receive an initial overview of the argumentation level of his or her text. By clicking on the different nodes, he could immediately see how a certain argument is supported. Moreover, based on user requirements, based on 30 user interviews, we also derived that an overall dashboard with 3 summarizing scores helps students with adaptive feedback messages in order how to improve his or her argumentation, or for example here the persuasiveness of his or her text. If then the student clicks on a certain claim which is not supported by a premise, this is indicated with an error, and then he or she can decide to, for example, here add an evidence, for example, here an example on how to improve the transparency of the certain business model. Just go a little bit forward. After entering this example, the student can analyze the text again and sees immediately how this claim is now supported by the premise. In order to evaluate our design features, we conducted 2 different studies. First, in a laboratory experiment, we evaluated the proof of concept of our tool. Hereby, we compared our tool against a proven discussion scripting approach for a certain writing exercise. The results indicate that students who used our tool wrote their text with a higher formal quality of argumentation and also a higher perceived quality of argumentation, according to the annotation scheme of Weinberger and Fischer 2006. Second, in our second study, we evaluated our tool in a long and the design principles in a field experiment over a time of 2 months. Our aim was to prove the effect of adaptive feedback on the metacognition argumentation skills of students. Thereby, students conducted a writing exercise where they wrote peer reviews to fellow students, and we provided them with adaptive feedback on the argumentation. The treatment group received adaptive feedback based on our design principles and our tool. The treatment group 1 received only adaptive general feedback based on the design principles, and the control group received no feedback. In total, students were writing 9 reviews over 2 months. Here also the results indicate that students who received adaptive argumentation, tutoring, and feedback based on our design principles had a higher formal quality of argumentation in another domain in a post-test. However, we didn't receive any significant results on the perceived argumentation level based on our treatment. Finally, we aim to summarize our insights in the nascent design theory according to Krieger and Jones 2007, where we summarize the design findings according to 8 steps. If you're interested in our research, please don't hesitate to contact us. If you want to access the corpora, please scan the barcode or access the website below. Thank you very much. Perfect. So if you would have any questions, feel free to ask.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much. This was a great presentation. I was curious about the field experiment, and I noticed in the field experiment, you had 11 females and 39 males. So I was curious about the randomization process. Did these people, was there any attrition, or was it completely randomized, the selection of the treated and control group?
Yes, so we have like we used a randomization tool where we randomly distributed the students to the different groups, and this is the distribution we received. Also, we have to note that in the program where we used the tool, the distribution of female and male is kind of uneven. So we have 1/3 usually female and 2/3 male students.
Thank you.
If you want, you can also ask any question in the chat, and then I will read it aloud for everyone.
Because nobody else is asking, so let me ask one more question. In the very first slide that you showed, summarizing your results, I noticed there was 2 box plots, and the perceived, let's say, effectiveness was kind of lower for the tool. Maybe I did not get it correctly. Maybe you can clarify that.
Yeah, so my supervisor will laugh again, because that's what he's telling me all the time. So that was like the first experiment we did, and we basically used a scale where 1 was a higher number and 5 was the lower number. And so the perceived argumentation level was higher, but in the box plot it's just the other way around. So I will take that again as a hint to change the scale the other way around and then display the box plot so that it's intuitive. Thanks a lot for that. Any other questions? Here's a question from Paul. Paul, do you want to say it yourself, or should I read it aloud?
Sure, I'm happy to say it. You did a nice job of discussing both in the paper and in the presentation how you're looking at argumentative claims and supporting evidence. But I'm curious about the relationship between multiple points of argumentation. So when you're making various claims, one important piece of writing and argumentation more broadly is making sure that those claims link together in some kind of logical sequence. And I'm wondering how you think about modeling that and sort of doing the kind of work that can advise students about that.
That's a very interesting question. So I think in the texts which we dealt with were peer reviews from students. So the peer reviews were basically structured in suggestions for improvement, description of weaknesses and strengths. And here usually the students made several claims under each category, right? So we didn't model the connection of the claims between these different parts, since they were like, a weakness was usually consisting of 2 or 3 claims and several evidence or premises, and then a strength was again consisting of several claims. However, I think since we didn't model this, this would be very important for future work, right? So this is something maybe which is also not so depicted in the literature on argumentation modeling in the NLP field, where you usually, follow up like on the Tolman model, where you model claim and evidence relationship and then the quality of this, but not really the overall discourse.
Great, thank you.
Any other question?
Okay, maybe I'll continue on because nobody's asking questions, so we have time. So my question would be, let's say you have some way of assessing the effectiveness of the tool, but let's say I'm just wondering how holistic your assessment is, because there is something to be said about being able to argue with humans and being able to communicate with them. So maybe that is captured via communications with the fellow tutors. So there are other things that happen which are just as important, not necessarily, the structure of the argument and whether you have the right kinds of premises, etc., etc. But the question I'm asking is how good is the evaluation of the overall abilities that get developed through AI tool versus by interacting with the fellow tutors, let's say.
Yeah, so that's a very interesting question. So currently, or like in the past 35 years, I think the research on argumentation skills was mainly focusing on the logical component of persuasion. So this is also what we described in the paper. So you have the overall persuasion model of Aristoteles, where you have logos, ethos, and pathos, for example. Also the empathy of somebody to convince the opponent, right? This is not modeled. This is currently not modeled with our approach, and this is also not done in the literature of the past 35 years, because usually you focus on the logical parts of argumentation. However, I agree that this is a major influence. You can look at some politicians, for example. They don't argue logically, but still they convince a large portion of the population because it's very emotional, for example. But here I would like to hint to a recent paper which we just published, and we'll present it tomorrow at the ACL conference, actually, where we model the empathic, the student's ability of convincing somebody through empathy and through empathic relations. And we also provided students feedback on their empathy skills in order to persuade somebody. And we also model that with like a BERT model, and then provide students feedback. And this is like another research area, but very important also, I think, for the overall skill set of persuasion, right?
Thank you.
And yeah, then I would say thank you. Thanks a lot for all the questions. And I think we would resume with the next paper. So the next paper is called Dual Information, Technology Strategy and Firm Performance, Insights from a Deep Learning Approach, from Yi Yang from the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, Chewei Liu from the Indiana University Kelley School of Business, and Sunil Mithas from the University of South Florida. So I would ask Yi to share your screen, and you have 10 minutes to present. And for the rest, I would ask to mute yourself. Yi, do you think you would be able to share your screen?
I'm sorry, did you just call my name?
Yes. Okay. Sorry. I think I made my mistake. It's not your time to present. It's you have it like in 10 minutes, right? So sorry, I made the wrong call. You are in 20 minutes. Sorry. The next paper is identity-based motivations for providing the unpaid labor that makes AI technology work. And this paper has won or is a finalist of the OCIS Best Student Paper Award. Congratulations to that. The paper is from Camille Endacott from the University of Santa Barbara and Paul Leonardi from the University of Santa Barbara. Sorry for that mistakes. And Paul, please go ahead with your presentation.
Sure thing. Give me just a second here to get it going. All right, are you able to see my presentation okay? Excellent. Well, it's really a pleasure to be here with all of you today. That regardless of what time zone you're on, it's morning here, Pacific time in North America. I'm doing this presentation on behalf of myself and Camille Endacott. Camille was a PhD student in the Department of Communication at UCSB, who just graduated and now is a new assistant professor at University of North Carolina. She's off getting married and honeymooning today, so I will be doing the presentation for us. And we're really excited to see Camille win the Best Student Paper Award this morning at the OCIS business meeting for this presentation. This is still very much a work in progress, so I appreciate any comments and feedback you have for how we can think about improving it. Camille and I have been interested for a couple of years in new advanced communication technologies that act on behalf of communicators entering into different kinds of communication environments. So when we typically think of mediated communication, we think of using tools as channels through which we communicate or platforms upon which different kinds of communication can be played out. But new AI and machine learning based technologies are kind of changing the game a little bit with respect to the communication environment, because they can be programmed to be communicators in their own right, often operating on behalf of individuals who are their principals, right? So the communication technologies are agents operating in the world based on decision-making capabilities through which they're programmed and constantly learning. And their communication can affect those who are their principals upon which they are communicating on behalf. So we decided that we wanted to study a suite of technologies that were relatively autonomous and conversational. And I'll explain what tools we looked at in a couple minutes. But one of the big questions that we began to puzzle with from the beginning of our study was that so many different empirical investigations into the role of new AI-based technologies, and especially those being used in organizations, have really shown that most tools are not operating at the level of autonomy that the popular press would expect us to believe. So there are lots of behind the scenes activities that are taking place where humans really are in the loop of making sure that they can classify responses being entered by users, substituting for places where the machine learning algorithms are not doing their job very well. And this human AI kind of symbiosis has been really essential to making sure that AI tools can function relatively effectively. A lot of people call these Wizard of Oz kinds of applications where it looks like the machine is really running on its own accord, but humans are behind the scenes pulling the strings a lot of the time. Most of that work, though, has been done in the context of AI developers trying to do things to codify and make sense out of the data in ways that substitute for places where the AI is not working as it should. Many of these communication technologies that are entering into our organizations, however, require a substantial amount of work on the part of the users themselves rather than the developers to be able to train the tools in meaningful kinds of ways. Of course, tools learn from a data set, and the data sets are often not able to be produced in advance for communication behaviors. And so it depends on a tool learning in the wild, right? So learning from people's routine interactions and communications with others. But the tools don't always work as well as they should. And what we wanted to understand was, why are people willing to put in the kind of work and effort and labor to make sure that these companies that are developing these AI tools have sufficient data to be able to run their machine learning algorithms on? One of the participants in an organization that we studied that was using a tool for scheduling that I'll describe in a minute anthropomorphized as Liz, talked a lot about how Liz really screwed up the communication that he was trying to have with some of his customers in order to schedule meeting times with them. And he talked specifically about how important it was for him to be able to step in and fix some of these problems that are happening. And the data scientists at the company that produced the tool also talked about this. They recognized that their tools were not going to be very efficient, at least at the beginning, in mastering all different kinds of nuances of communication situations. And so they needed to have users be able to step in and have the tool be able to learn from the corrections that the users were making in real time. So this is the context that we were interested in studying. And the literature provides a little bit of background on why people might be incentivized or motivated to give their labor to helping these kinds of technologies run. As I mentioned, most of the work has been done on the developer side. So looking behind the scenes at how new AI tools are made to work as humans in the loop are classifying data and correcting responses that the AI makes. And in this kind of work, often termed shadow work or ghost work, we have paid laborers that are working on very, very fractionalized pieces of work to do kinds of AI corrections. And they're paid, not a ton, but typically they're compensated for their labor. Hamid Ekbia and Bonnie Nardi have called this kind of work heteromation that really relies on the work of users doing relatively low paid and most times relatively low skilled work to make a technological system run effectively. But when we look across the literature in other situations where people contribute work for free, non-compensated, when we look at things like innovation contests or the use of expert systems and advice systems, there's a common thread that runs across those. And that is that people often are willing to contribute a fair amount of labor if they feel like it somehow benefits their identity, right? That they're able to make some kind of claim to identity that is bolstered by either using the technology or helping the technology to improve over time. And we know that how people enact their identities really can shape the work that they do and can, in many cases, substitute for lack of paid labor. It's interesting because many of these studies that have explored the role of identity in motivating people to share their time and their efforts, and especially help with tools, has recognized that people often are receiving very public kinds of recognitions for the work that they're doing. And so if you think about somebody who's in a user community that's offering advice to all kinds of users, there's a public component upon which they become recognized by the community as being a valuable contributor. In much of the kind of work that you would be doing to help train a machine learning algorithm, you're not getting that kind of recognition. And so many of the specific justifications for why identity-based mechanisms for providing unpaid labor that the literature suggests don't seem to play out very well, at least theoretically, in the context of AI tools. And so what we have been really focusing on in this study is trying to understand what are the mechanisms through which users' identification can shape the work that they do to make AI technologies work in practice? And what are the consequences for the organizations that make these technologies? So these are the two big research questions that guide our study. We decided to focus on a comparative study of two different AI tools that are used for the purposes of scheduling. So tools that can automatically calendar for you with people with whom you would like to meet. We selected these two tools, one called Time Wizards and the other called Smart Hours, because they were both doing the same thing. Both sets of developers had this idea that they wanted to revolutionize the world of scheduling and they wanted to make scheduling easier and more efficient, but they did so by using AI in very different ways. The Time Wizards tool was anthropomorphized. They called their bots Liz and Leo. And not only was the tool very conversational, used natural language processing so you could respond to natural language queries, but it was also highly autonomous, meaning that it could make decisions about when to communicate, with whom to communicate, and when it decided to ask somebody if they wanted to schedule a time, the tool itself decided what language it would use and what the timing and cadence of those requests would be. Smart Hours, by contrast, embedded their AI in the tool and did not anthropomorphize it. And so AI was running behind the scenes, presenting the users with specific links that they could share with their communication partners in order to do scheduling. So the degree of difference in terms of autonomy and conversational fluency characterized the difference between these tools. And based on research that's done in the communication and social actor perspective in the communication literature, we reasoned that these different manifestations of AI in these tools would probably have some different effects on the way that people employed the tool and also the kind of work that they did around it. Our study design looked at developers of both tools, both in relatively small startups, and then a number of independent users of the tool. And we sampled them at two different time periods, one really right after they started using the tool, and then we sampled them again about a year after they had been using the tool to try to get a sense of what were their initial impressions, how were they using it, and how had their use evolved over time. Because we recognize that identity is something that's constructed in interaction symbolically, that means that it's not only important to understand how users think about themselves in the context of using these new AI tools, but how their communication partners think about them as well is going to affect a user's own sense of identity. And so we thought it very important in the study to make sure that we were also sampling for users' communication partners, and we're able to, on most cases, interview at least 2 communication partners of every user with whom that user used these AI scheduling tools. So the communication partners had a sense of kind of what the users were doing and what the scheduling tool, the AI tools were doing as well. I'm going to just briefly kind of run through the findings at a high level and not read through any of the specific quotes that I presented on the screen here. But I want to just give you a flavor of what was happening in both of these organizations that developed the tool and the user case. So one of the big things that we noticed was that users of both tools, Time Wizards, which was the more anthropomorphized AI, and Smart Hours, which had the more embedded AI, both were interested in using the technology and adopting it as a symbolic resource to enact their identities. But the identities that they looked to enact were slightly different from one another. So because the anthropomorphized AI was very cutting edge and cool looking, many Time Wizards users wanted to adopt this technology as a way of positioning themselves as technology enthusiasts. And we have many, many examples of people talking about how they look to impress people, how cutting edge they were by using these technology tools, showing that they were kind of with the times by being able to schedule via AI. By contrast, users of Hours were interested more in using the tool to enact identities as master schedulers. The tool itself was not very flashy, right? They didn't have AI set forward in the tool, rather it was embedded. And so users thought that their use of the tool was to make themselves better schedulers, and that other people, right, their communication partners, would begin to see them as master schedulers. And I love the quote by Michelle on the right that says, if I use a tool like this, it's going to make me more accessible, but also allow me to keep my boundaries, and my clients will think that I'm more organized and I have my stuff together. Right. So in both cases, Time Wizards and Smart Hours, users adopted these tools and wanted to use new AI-based scheduling tools because they felt like these tools were going to help them symbolically communicate something about their identities. But very interestingly, the kinds of tools that they chose had impacts on what kinds of identities they thought that they were interested in communicating in the first place. In the paper, we spend a fair amount of time going over 4 different kinds of work that users in both cases were involved in order to make the AI work. And I'm not going to go into these in depth here, but I just wanted to sort of talk about very briefly what were these different kinds of work. The first kind was what we call operation work, which was work that the users had to do to actually make the tool function and deploy it correctly. And they spent a lot of time reconfiguring their own work practices, linking the tool to various technologies that were already in their stack, so that the AI tool could actually work in a way that would allow it to interface with their communication partners and collect data. They also had to engage in a fair amount of codification work, meaning that scheduling that was very tacit had to become very explicit so that they could create a set of rules that the AI systems could learn from. Not only were the AI systems learning from a broad data set of multiple users, but it was trying to learn in more local instances from each individual user as well. Codification work marked a fairly significant amount of the work that users in both Smart Hours and Time Wizards were doing. Remediation work was a third kind of work that was quite prevalent as well. And remediation work refers to actions that users took to fix errors that were made by the AI tools. So in many cases, these tools made lots of scheduling kinds of mistakes. They responded to times that people said they weren't available. They communicated in rude or gruff kinds of ways because they could choose how they communicated. And so users had to take an active role in kind of trying to fix a lot of these issues by manually going in and rescheduling and overriding what the tool would do. Of course, the companies loved this because each instance of a user doing this was a data point that the companies could learn from as their tools were improving based on their machine learning algorithms. And the final kind of work that they engaged in quite often was what we called relational work. And relational was the work of managing others' impressions of the tool, and by extension, the users, because the tools were operating on behalf of the users. And so much of what was happening in our data set, more for time wizards than for smart hours, was that the actions that the tool was taking reflected directly on the users who were their principals, right? And so if the tool kind of screwed up or did something that really annoyed or pissed off a communication partner, often there was a transference between the communication partner and the user. So the communication partner said, well, I'm really annoyed at the tool, and their annoyance would be transferred to the principal, who was the primary user of the tool. And we see this happening in both cases, although more at time wizards than in smart hours. I'm just going to kind of wrap by saying that what happened at time wizards was that many of the users that we interviewed felt like the continued use of the tool over time threatened their identities as considerate professionals. While on the one hand, it bolstered their identities as tech-savvy gurus, which they were really interested in. That was not the only identity that many of these professionals had, right? So a second identity was one of a considerate professional, and there was a clash between these two identities because the tool was doing that many of these users and their communication partners considered to be unprofessional and bothersome. And so users felt a fair amount of stress and were annoyed that they were undermining this salient portion of their identity. Where at smart hours, users rarely felt like they incurred any of these threats, in large part because they retained much more control over scheduling because the tool was not operating autonomously and conversationally on their behalf in the same way that it was at time wizards, where the tool could kind of just do things as it wanted to. When we looked over time at the number of sort of mentions of these different kinds of work that were taking place, I just want to alert your attention on the far right here, that we see that over time, many of the users at time wizards began to drop off on the number of times that they would engage in codification, operation, remediation, and relational work. As the struggle between their identities really came to the fore, they made the concerted decision that it's not worth engaging in all of these extra work practices to try to make the tool work on behalf of for the developers, and they began to do many less of these practices, and subsequently couldn't use the tools very often in their work. So overall, I've just given you a very high level sense of the findings, and I think the findings speak to our use of AI and new technologies as symbolic resources in various ways. Although I've only briefly discussed it, the role that multiple identities play in how we adopt new technologies, and particularly those that operate on our behalf and can reflect on us in either positive or negative ways, can have a powerful explanatory position in helping to understand how and why these tools are used over time and whether people are willing to exert effort to continuing to do the work for them. And also that even when we have tools that are relatively automated or appear to be, there's lots of hidden labor that's going on to make them work. And it's not just on the developer side, but also on the usage side as well, to make sure that the tools are folded into practice in ways that benefit users. So I'll end there. Thank you.
Maybe applause for Paul. Thanks a lot. We are a little bit over time, so I would just go with a couple of questions. But we have a little bit of time also on the left. Any questions for Paul and their research? maybe if not, I will start with one question. So I found your the implications you had very interesting, and what I thought was that that the user study or the specific situation where you embed then the AI system is very important, right? So just using a general solution for several, I don't know, application scenarios or so on, probably does not work so well if then by, for example, really identifying what are the needs in certain situation and then embedding then the AI technology. That I found very interesting. Is that something you will dig into deeper, or which of the 4 findings or from your pillars, from the pillars of your findings is like the one which you will catch up on now, or which you would encourage other maybe young PhD students to catch up on?
Well, I think that one of the key findings that we discuss more at length in the paper really is around, how much, so tools that have more autonomy to act on your behalf are likely to have more of a profound effect in shaping how people think of us. And we thought it was kind of an open question at the beginning, right? About, well, okay, so if you use a tool and you think that the tool sucks, will you just think the tool sucks, or will you think that Paul also sucks because he's the one that's asking me to use the tool, right? And what the data suggests pretty conclusively, at least across the 60 or so people in our sample here, is that there's a high degree of transference between my thoughts of the tool and my thought of the principal, right, who is employing the tool. So if we're ceding control or delegating, right, the authority for a tool to decide how it's going to communicate on my behalf, when it's going to do it, what that communication is going to look like, we should expect a lot of transference in my perceptions and interpretation about the tool to the principle of the tool. And that goes far beyond just the context of scheduling here to lots of different tools that we're seeing starting to enter into the communication environments. And so I think that's going to be an important area of study.
Cool. Very interesting. Does anyone have a question?
Maybe to quickly follow up on that, Paul, do you see a difference whether if people have bad experience with the tool versus good experience? Because I could imagine that if the tool works, then nobody really says you're a great guy, or the one who recommended it is a great guy. But if it doesn't work, right, so then the negative effect might be even stronger. Do you see certain hints in the qualitative data, or?
Yeah, thank you, Matthias. That's a great question. There were a number of instances, and again, I can only sort of say this anecdotally because we don't have a large data set, but there were a number of instances where communication partners felt like the tool works really well. It schedules me quite nicely. And what they would say often is that sort of hope, right? Like, wow, I can't believe this person's like using this AI tool. That's really cool. Maybe I should think about using an AI scheduling tool also, right? Bring myself into the 21st century. But many of the attributes that they would associate with the person who was scheduling had to do with being like, tech savvy and tech forward and a tech guru. And even in those cases, some of the principals, right, the ones that decided to use the tool for scheduling, became a little bit concerned or frustrated that, oh, maybe they're not actually taking me seriously as a paralegal, right? That they just think that I'm like somebody who's really good at using technology and I want to be taken seriously as a paralegal. So even in those kind of situations where the tool worked well, the fact that people have these multiple identities that they're trying to enact simultaneously, right, create this kind of conflict when the tool is really, at least as they perceive, the tool really helping them to bolster one aspect of their identity, perhaps at the exclusion of other aspects of their identity. And so I think that would be an interesting area to explore further as well.
Perfect. I think we will go with one more question, maybe from Brian, and then we will continue.
Great.
So thanks, Paul. It's fabulous, really interesting, and congrats to for getting the award. So this might be a little outside scope, but this idea of enacting multiple identities, it's to me, it's sort of it's different relationships we have, which is part of the context of the communication, right? So that if my wife asks me to schedule something versus the dean versus a student versus you versus someone, those are different identities and different roles, and also really different, potentially really different priorities. You know, like I just got this message from the NSF program officer, and it's like, you know, how high can I jump? It's like just as high as possible. You know, there's no, you know, right. So is it something that the people writing these incorporating context has been a classic problem with any kind of AI since like forever. So how are they coping with that?
Yeah, so it's a great question. You know, we have in our study a number of people that would really complain that, you know, there's a, let's call it like the prime meeting time, you know, and they really want to schedule their boss for the prime meeting time. But the AI tool doesn't differentiate between their boss and, you know, their postdoc, you know, or whatever it might be, you know. And so they schedule the postdoc for the prime meeting time. And then the person who's employing the tool, right, is like, oh, well, now my boss knows I didn't schedule him for the prime meeting time, so he's going to think that I'm like not really serious about our conversation. So there are a lot of those kinds of dynamics that people were perceptive of. From the developer's perspective, you know, it's interesting because there are cognitive models of scheduling in this case, right, that get embedded in the algorithms of the tool in very concrete and important ways. And so one of them, and this is especially true at Time Wizards, was the idea that the best scheduling, it means that you are efficient as a scheduler. That means that you can pack in as many meetings as possible, right, with the shortest period of delay between them, and you can have the fastest turnover amongst them. And so the way that this kind of supervised learning that was done on the data was to enhance the degree to which you could pack somebody's schedule. And so that's what the tool tried to learn, right? It wasn't, do I prioritize somebody for some symbolic reason? It was, if I put this person here and this person here, am I going to be able to fit in a third meeting? And that was the algorithm that it was using to determine where meetings were placed. So even though it might learn over time slowly that I'm denying this meeting and denying this meeting because I want my boss to be here, that's not the way that the algorithm is trained to be able to pack the schedule. And so that has real implications. And I know over time, so the last thing I'll leave with is the developers know this, right? And they struggle with this all the time. And they talk about that people have ideal versions of their schedules, and they have their enacted versions of their schedules. And what they don't know is, should we be scheduling someone's ideal version, or should we be scheduling someone's enacted version? You know, so like maybe if I say I always want a meeting before 7 a.m., should I take one? But I never do.
Maybe I think it's great that we have so many discussions, and there's also another question in the chat, but I really have to stick to the time. So I would love you to continue to offline. Yeah, maybe to follow you guys to follow up. So we would go with the next paper from Yi Yang from the University of Hong Kong of Science and Technology, and Chewei Liu from the Indiana University, and Sunil Mithas from the University of South Florida about dual information technology strategy and form performance insights from a deep learning approach. You have 10 minutes, and I would this time indicate the time after 10 minutes. Thanks a lot.
Sure. Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure to meet you here. You can see my slides, right?
Yes.
Just to check. Okay, good. It's great pleasure to meet everyone here. And my name is Yi, and I'm from Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. And my co-author Chewei and Sunil are also in the meeting room. So it's a great time. And in this paper, we study the it's been a really tough years for individuals and also for the firms all over the world due to the COVID. And many firms expedite their digital transformation efforts by increasing their spendings on information technology resources and other discretionary investment, such as advertising, SGA investment, and research and development reinvestment. Prior research has shown that the return on these investments really depends on the IT strategy of the firm. And so, the firm's IT strategy is very important. In general, there are three major IT strategy types. The first one is revenue emphasized, which means that the firms will use the IT investments for revenue generation. So that's the revenue IT strategy. There's another cost emphasized strategy, which means the firm use IT investment for improving efficiency and reduce cost. And also a dual emphasized strategy, which use IT investment for both revenue generation and cost reduction. You know, while IT strategy plays such a key role in firms' profitability, assessing IT strategy is very difficult because it's very difficult to directly get the answers from executives. So because they are not willing to tell people that what kind of IT strategy they are adopting. So as a result, for the researchers, most of the research on this line use survey data that is dated back to early 2023, 2004, which is quite out of dated. And therefore, in this work, we aim to answer two research questions. The first one is, can we infer firms' IT strategy emphasize from corporate disclosures using AI-based approach? The second one is, if we can infer IT strategy, can we examine the IT strategy and the discretionary investment relationship and how they affect firms' profits? So that's the two main research questions. So for the first research question, can we infer the IT strategy from the corporate disclosure? So let me give you a few examples. So in this table, I'm showing you 4 examples, 4 sentences mentioning the keyword information technologies, which are highlighted in yellow. So you can, if we have limited time, but so I'm not going to read the text, but what I want to say is that if you read the sentence carefully, you can actually tell what kind of IT strategy that the firms is adopting. Just to give you a quick example here. For example, for the second one, which is a company, Automation, in their 10K, Form 10K annual report, they are saying explicitly in their 10K report that they are using the information technology to enhance their customer relationship, to get more customers, to generate revenues, which clearly indicates that this is a revenue emphasized strategy. Also, in some other companies' corporate disclosures, even though they mention the keywords information technology, information technology, it actually has nothing to do with their IT strategy. So, but my point is that it seems that it's reasonable to read the sentences and infer the IT strategy using the text analysis method. So in this work, we adopt the BERT model, the BERT model, which is a state-of-the-art deep learning model for text analysis. The BERT model is released by Google in 2019, and it achieves superior performance in many textual analysis NLP tasks. In particular, to infer firms' IT strategy from their corporate disclosure, like 10K report or earnings conference call, we first annotate 1,000 sentences, which has the keyword information technology, randomly sampled from the corporate disclosure. We manually read the sentences, and then we determine whether the sentence indicates a revenue strategy or not. Similarly, we also manually read the sentences and determine whether the sentences indicate a cost strategy or not. After we have these annotated data sets, we fine-tune the BERT model by Google and produce 2 fine-tuned models, the BERT-based revenue model and the BERT-based cost model. I will not go through the technical details in the 10 minutes presentation. It's all in the paper, but simply put, once we get this fine-tuned model, give me a sentence, the model can predict whether this sentence indicates a revenue strategy or not, or cost strategy or not. If a sentence is classified in both models as positive outcome, we will label the sentences as a dual emphasize strategy. So that way, we can infer firms' levels IT strategy from their text corporate disclosures using text analysis methods. Well, the advantages of using BERT-based model are twofold. Firstly, BERT is a great model. It's actually trained by Google. It learns a lot of language patterns. Secondly, it's a contextualized model, which means that the meaning of the word is really determined by its context. So if you look at these two sentences, they have a very similar words, bag of words, that also talk about information technology, cost, reduce, but the first sentence is about IT strategy, while the second sentence is not about, has nothing to do with IT strategy. And if we use a traditional machine learning model, such as a bag of words model, it just cannot predict with high accuracy. However, the BERT model, which is a contextualized model, can do it with very, very good accuracy. To validate this statements, we just check the predicted power of these two models. The holdout data sets out of samples in comparison with the prior traditional machine learning approach, the logistic regression using bag of words representation. So we can see that the blue one is the ROC curve of the BERT model, which the higher the better. We can see that the model have much higher AUC compared to the traditional models. So then now we have a good measure for IT strategy, right? We want to examine the second research question. How do IT strategy emphasize and discretionary investment affect firm profits? To answer these questions, we compile a data set from following resources. We get IT investment data from Information Week survey. We get the firm's profits, fundamental data, discretionary investment data, and other control variables from the Camille stats. And we get the firm disclosures from Seeking Alpha and SEC websites. So Seeking Alpha is for the conference call. The SEC website is for the annual report at 10K. After we do a matching, we found a 2,400 matchings, firm year matchings that we have, where the firm explicitly mentioned the information technology in their IT, corporate disclosures, and we have data from CompuStat or Information Week. So, this is our variable definitions. We have profit variables. We have the, we have the IT investment variables, and also the IT strategy emphasize variables using BERT coding. Okay. So this is our summary statistics. I just want to bring up that in our sample, about 33% of the firms where they adopt the dual ID strategy, which is inferred by BERT. I think I don't have enough time to talk about the first, validity check, but I'm just going to go to this slide, which is the main result of our model. We examine the relationship between, how do IT strategic emphasize and discretionary investment affect firm profits. Dependent variable here is the profits, and the independent variable here is the dual emphasis, strategy inferred by BERT, and their interaction with the SGA investments and research and development and advertising, investments. We see that there's a significant relationship, positive relationship between the dual emphasis and the SGA investment and the IDAD investments. Well, this is another view of the empirical result showing that the firm with the dual emphasis strategy has higher return on SGA investments and research and development advertising investments. That is the dual emphasis compared to the firms only adopting revenue only or cost only emphasize strategy. So here's our key findings. We propose a new method, a new way of inferring the IT strategy of firm using an AI-based approach that leveraging the corporate disclosure. And our analysis shows that, well, this measure is reliable, it's accurate, and we also analysis shows that the dual emphasis firms have a higher, stronger SGA profitability and IDAD profitability relationship than the single emphasis firms. the findings also point to the importance of dual-eyed strategy in generating superior returns from discretionary investment. So the research and the managerial implications is that for the research implication, we show that how we can adopt the latest state-of-the-art AI method for learning some measures that is difficult to get in research. And this approach can be applied, can be generalized actually to some other variables, such as the functional strategies and the governance issues. For the managerial implications, the manager should synchronize their strategic choices and the discretionary investment. That's pretty much all I have for the presentation. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Yi, for this very nice research and applause. It was very interesting. And I would open now. If you have any questions, please feel free to write in the chat or speak aloud. If not, maybe I will start with a question. So I saw that you used a BERT model from 2019, which I think is a very nice indicator on how to use that in an organizational environment, right? So since 2019, there have been also some updates on BERT, which maybe might, improve your model capabilities and also your research to next level, for example, Roberta or other models. Is this also a future research for you to apply these models, or are you looking in other directions?
Yes, there's some latest update on the BERT model, but I think in terms of their performance, trying a different BERT-based model may not have may just give you a marginal improvement in terms of accuracy. So that may not be a major research direction that we are looking for.
Thank you. Any other questions? Maybe I could also ask a question. So since you applied basically this BERT model inside the different companies, did you also encounter other fields where you think text-based analysis in combination with IT strategy or other parts of the company might help them to improve decision-making, also, for example, revenue streams, where other people could, for example, look into with their research?
Sorry, can you repeat your question again?
So you have been looking at or you have implemented like a certain like a state-of-the-art model in an IT like in a company and for the IT strategy, right? So maybe you have also encountered other fields where companies might leverage like text-based implications to make better decision making or to improve revenues. Are there any others you did not look now in this in your paper, but maybe you would encourage other researchers to look at them, which are also have a high potential for improving decision making or revenue streams and so on? Okay, I see your I see your questions. So from my personal view, those BERT-based model, state-of-the-art NLP model, provides a lot of opportunities for researchers to get the key variables of interest from text. In this paper, we look at the IT emphasized strategy, and there's actually some other variables that might be very interesting to the researchers. For example, the functional strategies, maybe their the governance issues, also maybe their the innovative level of a firm. Those are all mentioned in their corporate disclosures, but has not been I would say mined yet. So if we could develop some method to more accurately read those information from the corporate disclosure, that would be actually give us a lot of opportunity, enrich the researchers in terms of asking some empirical questions. Cool, that's very interesting, I think, and a lot of good examples. maybe I would just give a little bit more time for any questions.
And we can go to the next. We can go to the next presentation, and then later on we can have an overall discussion on if anybody has any questions. Yeah, please go ahead to the next presentation.
And maybe Yang, or do you, if you want, you can also just ask
it's
it
okay.
later.
I can hold the question to the end, toward the end. Hi.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So so let's go to the next presentation. And thanks again, Yi, for the nice research and the presentation and for keeping the time. So the next presentation is by Huai-Tzu Cheng from Louisiana State University for the paper "I'm Not a Chatbot: An Empirical Investigation on Humanized Profiles on Social Media Platforms," together with her co-authors Yang Pan and Rudy Hirschheim. You have 10 minutes, sir.
Hi, everyone. Can you see my slides? Okay. Hi, everyone. My topic today is "I'm Not a Chatbot: An Empirical Investigation on Humanized Profile of Social Media Customer Service Representatives." I'm Huai, and I'm a PhD student from Louisiana State University. My co-author is Dr. Pan from Tulane University and Dr. Hirschheim from LSU. So the research background is like the social media customer service. Have you ever tried to reach out the customer service on social media platform like Twitter? And, you know, the customer, they are increasingly switch to social media platform when they need the customer support. And customers, they have gradually found that using the social media platform is a more effective way of getting attention from brands comparing with the traditional telephone or email. And besides, the artificial intelligence is increasingly expanding in customer service. Recently, the chatbots are widely used in customer service. However, the customer, they feel frustrated when the bot doesn't always understand what they want, and they still prefer the human agent over the chatbots for their customer service engagement. As social media becomes the main point of customer contact, the customers don't intuitively know whether they are talking with a chatbot or a real person on social media platform. So the Thiemo former CEO says, the Thiemo social media specialist on Twitter is a team of real people, not bots. And when customers know they are speaking with a real person and not some bots, they are happier. And this motivates our research. So we identify the research setting to empirically investigate these following research questions. First, does the use of humanized customer service on social media channels increase customers' positive emotions and reduce complaints on social media? Second, if so, how does the effect vary across different groups? And there are two relevant theories in our research. So first is the social presence in computer-mediated communication, CMC. The definition of social presence in CMC is the sense of being with another or the sense of being together in a virtual environment. And the features of the CMC environment are different than those of the face-to-face environment because users are not able to see their actual communication partner, and the absence of the identity cues, aka the social context cues, like the demographic and personal feature of the communicators, is the major feature of the text-based CMC. So you can know the social presence can be seen as a critical factor that affects the interaction on CMC. And another relevant theory is the effect of the social cues on CMC. When conversation partner conveys the social cues about their personal identities, such as displaying the profile photo, the first name, or even the short biography, people perceive a high degree of social presence, so they are more likely to form the positive impression and reduce the feeling of ambiguity to their conversation partner. And in the context of social media, several studies have used personal profiles to evaluate the effect of social cues on social media users. And the results show that the social cues positively affect people's attitude and perception toward the use on social media. Hence, we expect that the social presence and social cues will positively affect people's attitude and perception toward the customer service agents on social media platform. And we find that the humanized profile of T-Mobile Help's customer service agent on Twitter can be used as a nature experiment setting to investigate our research question. And this slide is a timeline of our nature experiment. So our treatment is the humanized profile. On February 22nd, 2017, the T-Mobile Help adopted a new feature aiming to increase the humanization by adding the personal identity information to its customer service agent's profile. So customers know they are talking to a live person, not a chatbot. And for the data collection, we adopted a difference in differences specification, and we collect the tweets mentioning the official customer service Twitter accounts of 4 major US telecom companies for 3 months before and after this event. So our control groups are AT&T, Verizon, and Sprint. Our treatment group is T-Mobile Help. And in the left side, you can see that this is the customer service tweet of the in pre-treatment period. So in pre-treatment period, customers could only see the T-Mobile logo and an agent's name or initials on customer service tweet. And all control groups customer service tweets look like this. And in the right side, you can see in post-treatment period, we can see T-Mobile Help's customer service tweets display a profile with a personal identity information, including an agent's profile picture, full name, and short biography. So if user clicked the profile, and the user can see more detailed information of the agent. And we use this change as an exogenous event for all Twitter users and examine the impact of humanized profile on customer emotional expression or complaints via public tweets and customers' satisfaction when they engage with the customer service agent with humanized profiles. And our main dependent variables are sentiment, complaint, and satisfaction. The sentiment is the sentiment score of tweets. For the complaint, we use a supervised machine learning algorithm to create a complaint classifier to classify whether a tweet is a complaint or not. Dummy variable called the S1 if the tweet is complaint, 0 otherwise. For the satisfaction, is a dummy variable called the S1 if the user express gratitude or positive sentiment in the conversation thread or user click likes to the customer service agent's response, 0 otherwise. And this is our main results. This table shows the result of the difference in difference estimation. So you can see in column 1, 2, 3 is our main DB, and then in the left side you can see the post is a dummy variable called the S1 if the date is on or after the treatment, 0 otherwise. For the treat variable is a dummy variable called the S1 if the telecom carrier is T-Mobile Help, 0 otherwise. And our main interest variable is the interaction term post-time stream, which capture the DID effect. And like the total days, followers, followings, etc., they are all control variables. The result shows that for sentiment, we see the coefficient of the interaction term is positive and significant. Specifically, the humanized profile adoption increased the sentiment score by 2. And in second column, you can see for complaint, we apply a linear probability model, the LPN on the DID setting. And we see the coefficient of the interaction term is negative and significant. The predict percentage of complaint tweets mentioned the T-Mobile Help was reduced by around 1.6% after the adoption of the humanized profile. And in the third column, you can see for the satisfaction, we also apply the LPN on the DID setting. The coefficient is positive and statistically significant. Specifically, the humanized profile adoption increases the likelihood of express satisfaction by 2.3. Overall, the finding shows that the humanized profile used by service agents in customer service tweets leads to an increase in the sentiments of public tweets, fewer complaint tweets, and a higher customer satisfaction. And also, we also conduct several robustness check. The first one is the the pre-trained DID estimation. The key assumption of difference in difference is that the trend should be the same in both the control and treatment groups in the absence of the treatment. So we test the parallel consumption during the pre-treatment stage to ensure the treatment and control group, they are comparable. The results show that, and you can see the results show that the coefficient of the interaction turn are statistically insignificant, which indicates the tweet segments, complaint, and simplification in the treatment and control group have similar trends in the pre-treatment period. And second, we conduct the DID approach combined with the propensity score matching to address the endogeneity concern and sample selection bias issue. The results show that the coefficient of the interaction turn are similar to our baseline model. The evidence provides further support to our main finding. And then we also control the various time fixed effects. So in our baseline model, we use a month and day of week fixed effect to control the unobserved heterogeneity and within week variation. Here, we further control the week dummy and day dummies to take the week level and day level seasonality into consideration. And overall, you can see the results are consistent with our main finding. The last robustness check is the alternative control group. So the market leader in telecom industry, they may adopt a different customer care strategy from the Thiemo. So to address this concern, we exclude the market leader AT&T in our control group. We use an alternative control group that is Verizon and Sprint. And the results show that the coefficient of the interaction turn are similar to our baseline model, so our findings are still hold. So we also test two heterogeneous treatment effects. The first one is the verified versus the unverified Twitter accounts. The other is the gender. So the first one is so for the verified Twitter accounts, the Twitter verified accounts are legit and belong to the well-known public figures in the society, such as the sports player or the reporters. And we conjecture that the verified Twitter users are significantly different from the unverified users. So we test the heterogeneity treatment effect. And the results show that the verified users have fewer complaint tweets, and they are more likely to express the satisfaction in the conversation. And the second heterogeneous treatment effects is gender. So previous studies argue that when social cues are given in CMC, the gender differences exist in expectation and perception. So we hypothesize that the effect of customer service agents' humanized profile will be uneven across the gender. You can see the results indicates that the female users have a stronger increase in tweet sentiments and they have fewer complaint tweets. So the results are consistent with our expectation that the humanized profile impact has a significantly larger effect toward female than the male users. So for the conclusion, so basically our findings show that the personal identity cues in the humanized profile of customer service representatives lead to an increase in sentiments in public tweets and a fewer number of complaint tweets. Besides, the customer, they are more likely to express their satisfaction by clicking like and posting thankful replies when they engage with customer service agent with humanized profile. For the heterogeneous treatment effects, the effects of the humanized profile are stronger for verified Twitter accounts and female users. Consequently, the humanized profile of customer service agents undoubtedly increase customers' belief that they are communicating with and being taken care of by a real human, because customers perceive a higher level of social presence toward customer service agents comparing with the agent without the humanized profile. And this study contributes to the literature of social media customer service and the effect of social cues on social media platform and CMC. And this study, I think this study also an insight to firms providing the social media customer service.
Thanks a lot for your presentation, and applause to you. And I congratulate to a very nice paper. So if anyone has a question, just raise up your hand or post it in the chat, then I will read it aloud. Maybe I can start again with a short question. So I found the effects you found very interesting. Did I understand it right that the first variable was the sentiment, so this was the polarity score of the tweet which you measured, right? The second one was a complaint on that, and the third one was the satisfaction, which is then also basically the polarity score if it's positive, right? Or did I misunderstand that?
You said that their coefficient?
I mean the measurement of the third variable, the satisfaction variable. Maybe if you can go one slide back.
Okay. One second.
Where you said it's a dummy variable expressing the positive sentiment in the conversation, right? So I asked myself.
So for the sentiment, it's a continuous variable.
Yes, the sentiment is this polarity score basically, right? And the satisfaction, it's also related to the sentiment variable, right? Because it's the positive sentiment. Or did I misunderstand that?
So actually, the customer replies content like the gratitude or positive sentiment. So actually, I create a list for the gratitude word, like the thank you. I really express appreciate, great, something awesome, something like that. So if the user express this positive, this sentiment, these words in their conversation, I will mark these tweets as one. Or the second method is if the user click like to the customer service agent's response.
Okay.
I will also code this tweet as once. Yes.
So it's, yeah. So I was just wondering, did you check, however, if the sentiment and the satisfaction is somehow correlated? And yeah, do you think this has an effect maybe on the results?
It's a really good question. I think I will go back to check if the sentiment or satisfaction they are highly correlated or not. Thank you for your suggestion.
And maybe a suggestion for future work. So I think there are, what I'm looking also into is like emotion analysis. And there are various libraries available, for example, text to emotion, or there are pre-trained models on Hugging Face, which you can easily basically embed there and then analyze like the Ekman emotions, for example, of the tweets. And there, the advantage is that you have a much higher granularity level of the emotions than only the positive or negative sentiment, right? So this would be probably very interesting, and it's very scalable because you just have to implement it easily in your code, and would be also very interesting results. So maybe if you want, you can follow up on that.
Thank you. It's a very good suggestion. Thank you so much.
Cool. Maybe any other questions or comments?
Okay, maybe I'll ask a question. So if you have to name your chatbots, should it be, and this is maybe unrelated to your presentation, should it be male names or should it be female names? Based on,
I think it depends on the purpose and the users. Maybe female name, I think.
Okay, because most of the time we see, Alexa, Siri, and they seem like, female names. So I was just wondering whether there is any research which has investigated whether you should have them as male names or female names, depending on the context.
So yes, Sunil, I think that's a very interesting question. We check the gender on the I think why we check the gender of the person that initiate the conversation with the agent, but we never check the gender of the agent. That may be something to check. So yes. Even we see the personal information of the agent, but whether the agent is a name more like a female or is a name more like a male may affect the result. So that's something worth to investigate on. Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Sunil.
Any other questions or comments? Maybe Yang, did you have a questions from the paper before, which you still want to ask?
Oh, okay, yes. I'm not sure E is still here, but I think it's interesting, the research. I'm just curious, you analyze the 10K as well as the conference core. Which part you believe the data is more related to artist strategy? So the firm is more likely to disclose artist strategy with 10K or conference core?
Yeah, in our analysis, we only look at the sentences in the 10K or earnings call that mention the keyword information technology. So only those sentences that mention the information technology will be used for our classification. We will classify whether this sentence indicates a revenue strategy or cost strategy or nothing related to the strategy. Because we see that many times when the firm mentioned the keyword information technology, it's actually nothing to do with the strategy. For example, they just mentioned that our spending of IT information technology is this number, but it does not tell you anything about strategy. So our classification model is trying to infer that as well.
So I think the question that Yang is asking is, which one is better, like 10K or the earnings call? Is that the question? Like, which one is, where do you think people are more likely to disclose their IT strategy?
Yeah, I think my experience is that the 10K might be the better source for that. In the earnings conference call, it's not very common, I would say, that the manager will explicitly mentioning about their information technology, but in their annual reports, they do mention their spending on IT, but sometimes they just mention number. Sometimes they mention how they aim to use those this investment. So, yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure.
So thank you everyone for the session. Thank you all the authors for the presentation and that we finished in time. I would encourage discussions between the authors after the sessions, and I wish you all a good AOM meeting and all the best for the future. Have a good time and good luck.
Thank you, Thiemo, for chairing the session. And thank you to all the authors. Great presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.